That is Sean Fitz. He is insider for Blue White Illustrated in recruiting, publisher for Blue White Illustrated, and he's about to deliver some very good news for Penn State football fans who have been waiting for this moment for a while, Fitz. So let's get right to it. Penn State has a commit. Who is it?
Well, since we're live, if you're on the internet right now, you probably have heard, but Penn State picking up commitment from Brooklyn Erasmus Hall wide receiver Lyrick Samuel. We talked about Samuel on the show last week. This is a guy that's been to Penn State 7 times in the last year. That's a lot. That's more than Ryan Snyder, who's off vacation now. So this one doesn't count toward his total. But he was given a 4-star rating by On3. Still working his way into the positional rankings, but he's a good player. This was one of the guys that I saw at camp a couple of times last summer. And he can play some ball. And in addition to that, big frame. And I know we've talked about the decline of the big receiver, but this guy ran a 4.56 at camp last year at 6'3.5", and that's really hard to do. So Penn State on the board at wide receiver, Marques Hagans on the board, the embattled Marques Hagans on the board at wide receiver in the class of 2025 is a pretty good start with Lyrick Samuel.
Yeah, Lyrick Samuel, we'll get to his film in just a second, but how 7 trips up to Penn State, was this Penn State's to lose the entire time? How's the relationship gone with the Nittany Lions and Marques Hagans and the coaching staff?
I believe, I would say, yeah. I mean, this is one that we've been watching for a while. He came up for I believe it was a spring practice last year. Came back for, and we talk about that trinity there. He came back for the blue-white game. He was there for the Lasch Bash. Wasn't there for the actual whiteout, but was there for the West Virginia game, which is, a quasi whiteout. So he has been on campus for sort of the big ones, and that's really where we've listed that. Yes, On3 has the kid listed as a 4-star prospect. Thank you very much to our commenters in the comment section. We would know this. We work for On3. So
right. Also, it's on the internet. Like, that's just easy to check.
Yeah, and I think the hardest thing here was sort of filtering down which wide receivers were sort of bubbling to the top of Hagan's list.
Yeah,
simply because they've offered about 100 of them, and that's a slight exaggeration. I think the number's in the 80s right now. So trying to figure out which crop of wide receivers was the ones that would make the most sense. And Lyrick Samuel was one that was always kind of, in the fringe of things. And then he came back for a junior day in January. And, since then, things have been pretty heavily skewed toward Penn State.
So I know that you're not Charles Power, you don't do the rankings, but a guy that is a 4-star has a 91 overall rating from On3, but not in the On300 rankings, and it does not have a positional ranking or a state ranking. So is he a late riser in the class at this early point, if that makes any sense? Like, he wasn't part of the original kind of national reach for 2025, and now we're into this discovering players and getting them finding the guys that maybe slipped through the cracks early in their career. Is that a fair way to characterize that, or what do you make of that particular situation with Lyrick Samuel?
No, I don't think so. He's had an offer for a while. It's an interesting sort of subplot. Was Penn State hasn't been successful at Erasmus Hall. They've been recruiting a couple of guys there, but Rutgers has got a lot of guys. So apologize if you hear my dogs in the background. They're excited about the Lyrick Samuel commitment as well. It's just one of those things. But no, this is a guy that's been on the radar for a long time. But like you said, a lot of things can happen. Your junior year is the key season when you're talking about looking at film, trying to figure out who sort of rises above the others. They had those testing numbers on hand, and they're tough to turn down. I mean, we talk about running well, but running well at size is something that's completely different. So he kind of fits that profile there, and he's been on, like I said, he's been on campus a ton, and he really makes a lot of sense for Penn State.
We're going to try and keep this video to our normal length of like 12 to maybe at most 15 minutes, but we're here in the chat if you want to talk to us. Just in case you're here watching the live replay, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. There seems to be some confusion. Lyrick Samuel right here. This is a 4-star, 91 overall. We don't come on here and lie. Like, that's not good for us to do. So in the chat, there's some conversation about whether he's a 3-star or a 4-star. You can see by the rankings, ESPN does not have him ranked currently. That is affecting his industry ranking. He is a 4-star by On3 and a 3-star by ESPN and Rivals. And I guess the question I have, Fitz, going off of that is he seems like a guy, 6'4", runs fast, that can climb recruiting rankings if he isn't where he might be in the future. So is this a under the radar prospect that Penn State's been after, that they did a great job recruiting and developing that relationship early? Or do you think he's a guy that ultimately is what he is here in this class?
So sent him across to Charles Power and the other guys that ranked guys last week. Just because we wanted to get the tape in front of him in case something did happen. And I expected probably 89, 90 with the potential to rise. I think he's a really good player. I think he's a guy that, hey, 91 is a heck of a start. I probably would have started him just a little bit lower and waited for him to rise. He plays in Brooklyn. They throw, but they don't throw a ton. 27 catches last year as a junior, and including 2 touchdowns in the city championship game, which is good production, but it's not a situation where they're asking him to go out and catch 60 balls a year. So I think that there's some rising left to do when he gets out there and you see him move amongst his peers. I think you're going to get a good sense for what kind of speed he brings to the table with that frame. Again, tall receivers hard to come by. Not so much there aren't tall receivers, but you have to have a certain amount of explosion. You have to have a certain amount of sort of, I guess, smoothness, if we're going to talk about that. Tall receiver, and I think he has the potential to do so. You turn on the tape. He put up a couple clips from 7-on-7 today, attacking the football, really not fighting it, and I think that's one of the bigger things. If you take a look back at like a Justin Shorter and you watch him catch the ball on his highlight tape, we wanted to see a lot of things with Justin Shorter because of the physical prowess and just that complete profile that he brought to the table, but he did fight the ball, quite a bit, and Samuel, you don't see that as much. I think he's going to continue to sort of round out those edges a little bit, sand it down, and find a pretty good player there. I think if this is your start for the wide receiver class at Penn State, you got some real potential there.
Yeah, he is absolutely, I think, an X receiver with that size and speed. And I know that I talk a lot about those positional distinctions, and they might not really matter because X's can play Z and they all play somewhere in the offense. But I guess to the point here is you mentioned 6'4", and usually any receiver that Penn State's recruiting that's 6'4" is probably playing tight end. But he has the speed to go down the field. The thing that I do wonder, he's very linear. His ability to run a full route tree, I think there's positive signs, but that would be the one question I have as he develops. Does he get better and smoother in transitions where he's not in the open field like here? But if he can, this is a guy who has great run after the catch potential, great speed, a vertical threat, which Penn State has needed, a real danger in these situations. I'm interested from his frame. I feel like he could land anywhere from 180 pounds to 210. Like, just generally, what do you think of his growth potential, what you've seen from him either up close or here on film watching him run around the field?
Yeah, he's as skinny as they're going to get, I think. He's about 170, 173 right now. And so he's got quite a bit to fill out. But I think he's the type of kid that if you take a look at the way that he runs and, sort of the lack of wasted motion in terms of his running style, there's a lot to like in terms of him being 195 pounds or him being 200 pounds and being able to still run. So there's that. And he's got like a better base skill set than a Malik Mega, who's a 6'4" guy that can really run. But I think there's a little bit more than I think there's a little bit more skill that comes into play there with Lyrick Samuel.
So Kevin Chandler is in the chat. Kevin, by the way, is a regular replying to videos. Wanted to give him a shout out. And the number one comment on almost every single video that we've done, every breaking news where we had a commitment was, hey, when's there a wide receiver? And Kevin is a very positive dude. He's always been positive in the chat. So he's happy about that. I wanted to give him a shout out. I wanted to give the YouTube replies a shout out. This is, I think, a good thing as we're kind of recapping all of this on Lyrick Samuel, a guy who has a lot of development to do, but there's a lot of upside here with Lyrick Samuel. So looking at the class, I know you and Ryan Snyder have mentioned a lot of different names when it comes to this board, but if we zoom out a little bit from Lyrick and we look at what is in the region, how do you feel? Because everyone's very excited right now, but they want to know what's next to build and get, another guy in the class. How do you feel with Lyrick Samuel on board, things kind of shake out? Is there anything maybe a little bit clearer now that they have their first guy on board?
Well, anytime you take somebody, it's going to affect somebody else just from a number standpoint. So this is your chance if you're Penn State to get, to get one on board and look at all the other guys that are in that sort of tier. I have Quincy Porter at the top of the list just because he's pretty awesome. Like, he's a really good player, but there's a great group of regional guys, Jeff Exenor, Lex Cyrus at Susquehanna Township. Desi Jones has been on campus a bunch. You talk about those guys at Baltimore City College, Vernon Allen and Romero Eisen. There's a bunch of guys out there that kind of makes sense for Penn State. Zymer Smith is another guy down the Eastern Shore of Maryland. So there's a lot of names out there, but like we just said at the beginning of the video, like trying to figure out where those guys fit on the list is tougher than it may imagine, because you look at those, okay, who do they have verified numbers for? Because you're going to float to the guys that you have more data for. Yep. Whose film kind of popped over this guy and didn't show what you hoped from this guy. So there's a lot of sorting out to do. And that's why from sort of November to January, we're talking about that receiver board and being like, things got to shake out. And I think it's time, you got Mark Dupuis on campus now as a wide receiver analyst here, who was previously the wide receiver coach at Old Dominion. So he's got some eyes on these guys. Hagans, of course, that recruiting staff does a wonderful job in terms of getting, all the information possible. So I think it's still working itself out. They had a bunch of guys on campus in January. And again, we're going to go back to, there's no hurry here. Like, this is not a situation where you have to have 4 receivers in your class by the summer. There's going to be guys that start setting up official visits. There's going to be out of region guys that seemingly pop off from nowhere, really, that all of a sudden pop up on campus for June and June official visits, maybe May official visits here as well. So there's no shortage of names, and that's what happens when you offer nearly 100 wide receivers. Lyrick Samuel, the first one to sort of put his to stake his claim in the Penn State class of 2025. Probably thinking 3 or 4. It's going to depend on this room. It's going to depend on the class of 2022, how things go with guys like Anthony Ivy. Mekhi Flowers is over there now. Tyler Johnson. If you see some development from those guys, it could have an effect on how many numbers that they take in 25. And of course, this is a position that they sort of routinely target in the transfer portal as well. So a lot of fluid numbers to go with that. But, this is a chance for in Marques Hagans' second full cycle to sort of upset that room and get it where get it to where they need to be, because nobody's coming out here and saying that Penn State's receiver room is anywhere close to what it needs to be to compete at the level that they want to do. But you take these baby steps, you get guys like Lyrick Samuel who can point you in the right direction.
Yeah, and just kind of answer James Holderman question to point in the right direction. I think he's a guy that has upside, and he wants to know how many years do you think it takes him to challenge for playing time. That's impossible for us to sit here and say, but I would say he is a guy that is not a project in terms of I think that there's things he needs to learn and he needs to grow. There's not a lot of immediately translating things right now, other than he's big and he's got a lot of potential. So I would say, like, I hate to use the label of project player, because I do think he could blossom in the next 6 to 8 months, put up great senior film, and then the conversation changes. But what we see on film right now, physically, he needs to develop, and then I think he needs to put some more on film in terms of his positional skills. And the offense, by the way, is not great at Erasmus of throwing the ball down the field, which would be his skill set.
Yeah, and no relation to Curtis Samuel as well, but he's a taller guy, and those guys are going to take a little bit longer. You can find a freak at some point, but that's not. I don't think that's what we're looking at here. I think Lyrick Samuel, very, very good prospect, but for 2025, maybe 2026, he might be a little bit in line at that point.
Appreciate everybody here in the chat. We'll take one more question here. This is from Bradley Barnes, who's been, very active so far tonight. He says, do you guys notice the type of wide receiver Andy Koltnicki likes to recruit and run in his systems? Good ones, being at Buffalo and Kansas fits. I don't know that there's a great answer to that, but I would say, at least in my opinion, and I'll throw it to you to end our conversation, vertical receivers are important. Being able to stretch the field downfield. He does a lot of deep isolation stuff. He wants to get guys against safeties if he can. So I would say this is a good fit, for what Andy Koltnicki does. Do you have any thoughts on what you've seen so far as fit, style, any of those things?
It's going to sound condescending as hell, but like at Buffalo and Kansas, you take the best of what's around, the best that you can get. And that's, you're at Kansas, you're fighting not only Kansas State, but you're fighting all those Big 12 or used to be Big 12 programs out there going after the same crop of guys. So you take what you can get. And I think that's what you see in the Northeast as well. I mean, regardless of the wide receiver coach, and there's been plenty of turnover at wide receiver coach in the last few years, the names have pretty much stayed the same in terms of who they target, just because you want the best players and the best players around. Now it's your job as a coach to turn those guys into, eventual productive college players. But you look at what's around there, and, I don't think, I think if you took a look at what the eventual targets, and I'm not just talking about the 80 guys that there are 85 guys that they offered, but the eventual targets that you zone in on, Mike Yursich's are not going to be that much different than Andy Koltnicki's.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Good receivers kind of have a similar skill set, and they kind of bubbled at the top. So,
Right.
that's a fair point to end us on. And with that note, with more breaking news, we will be back here to talk about it. Whether it is another commitment, any sort of offseason news, any changes, and of course, we're going to be doing this again, BWI Live tomorrow at 10 a.m. talking about Penn State football. So make sure you subscribe to bluewhiteillustrated.com for our special. It is 2 months for $1 because you guys here on the YouTube channel support us. We want to give you the opportunity to go over to the site and see if you like it for a little bit longer. Use promo code PSU1 to get 2 months for just $1. I'm Thomas Frank Carr for Sean Fitz. We'll be back with more on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube.